Hey Daniel, do you mind making me the host? And then I can make you a co-host. Or whoever economic growth is.
Hi folks, for clarification, can we know who TSU is, who economic growth is?
Oh, sorry, I'll change my name. It's Emily.
Hi Emily, are you going to be helping us out with the technical stuff?
Yeah, I just need to become the host so that I can do the breakout rooms and everything.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi. Emily, I'm going to switch it over to you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
From a screen share point of view, will somebody else be able to actually screen share? Just because I find it easier to be able to facilitate the sessions, not in screen share mode. So that I can see all the participants and if they're speaking.
Daniel, do you mind doing that?
Yeah. So, okay. Sorry, I was just going to say that we're actually in an MOU signing ceremony currently, and I think Joseph is on transit, still trying to check with him to join. Yeah.
Okay. I've noticed you're always the most prompt to meetings, so props to you. Anyways, over to you, Daniel.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Number one, I just want to make sure we're recording it. Emily in the background, thank you. So welcome everyone to today's session. I think I'm at the same place where we were yesterday. I'm still wearing the same shirt, sitting in the same spot. I think some of you are wondering, this guy hasn't left his spot. Anyway, today is our session 3, and we think it's going to be an exciting one. And we just want to start off first, asking, an informal question like what MSD topics really make us nervous. And I'm going to pick on Lorenz first.
Great. Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I think what makes me nervous is sometimes that there's very ambitious scopes of work and very high expectations with little time in the field to actually gather information and do everything that's listed in the scope of work, and just meeting the expectations of the donor or the client. Client being, for example, Mercy Corps or others.
Yep, great. Can I pick on Alison next?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick just one. A topic that makes me nervous is impact projections. I know I bring this topic up a lot, but it also makes me nervous. It's just something that's really hard to do well without, it can be really hard to get the level of effort right. How do you get some practical knowledge that's going to tell you whether or not something's going to work without feeling like you're jumping into a deep end of calculation. So that balance definitely makes me nervous.
Yeah. Great. Katie, do you want to share what makes you nervous?
Yeah, and I think it's important because you guys have teed me up as the expert in MSD, and I'm like, nobody is an expert in MSD. We're always learning about something new. And for me, I think I'm nervous because a lot of the market systems analysis projects and things that I've done are more so in the wash and energy sector, less so in agriculture and livelihoods, which is where everybody else has knowledge. Which is why on this slide we're saying new perspectives provide value. I've seen things and new perspectives that I bring into this thing, and I'm constantly learning about new and different sectors. I'm not going to have industry knowledge in every single sector that exists. The most important thing is to know the process and be confident in asking the right sort of questions and knowing who to talk to when you don't know those questions, and that's okay. That's the whole thing. So that would be my honest nervousness. How about you, Daniel?
I mean, I think what really makes me nervous is usually on attribution, especially, you know, we work with, like with the MSD approach, you get to work not directly, but indirectly. And sometimes articulating that is problematic, especially if you haven't laid a good foundation, or sometimes there are challenges with that, either with the partnership itself or with the way you've developed your logic or, you know, results framework and stuff like that. So sometimes like that sort of makes me nervous, like how well can we get those foundations right that we can attribute very strongly and say, hey, we think our actions led to this change in this market or in this function. Yeah, so that's really what makes me nervous usually when starting an MSD program. Like, hey, can we make sure we're getting this right? Can we make sure we can have a clear pathway to attribute what we're trying to achieve? I'm gonna pick on Mesret, if you don't mind sharing. What makes you nervous?
I mean, as Alison said, there are a lot of things that makes you nervous implementing an MSD program. Some is related to what Alison said in terms of like our MND plan, making sure that each intervention has its own MR plan, and we're actually evaluating the progress of that intervention. But overall, in terms of program management, we see results very late, and that makes a lot of parties nervous. Our donors get nervous, project team members get nervous because they're not seeing quick kind of things happening, and they feel like, you know, they're tired of like, you know, doing the stuff which you don't see the results right away, and that makes them nervous and discouraged. And you know, supporting those type of situations, it's always a nerve-wracking kind of situation.
Yeah, like absolutely. Yeah, definitely share a lot of that. I'm gonna pick on George. George, you're welcome. George, can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear George, or I'm not sure if there's a challenge. I'm gonna pick on Chidinma, if you don't mind sharing what makes you nervous about the MSD topic.
Okay, just like everyone else has said, it's really about you know, the methodology and really getting the numbers and the results. You know, so like, and also like Mesret said, one of the key things is being able to, you know, for the teams to have like a firm grasp of, you know, the entire methodology, so that they are able to, you know, accurately determine what the impacts could be like, and then also communicating that to some donors, because while donors are interested in the MSD approach, a lot of them still haven't really come to terms with the fact that, you know, it takes a long time to see results. But when these results start coming in, you know, we're able to have like the numbers, like really huge numbers. So I think, those are the things that really scare me. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that's one of the challenges as well when you transition from a humanitarian program or an emergency program to a development program with an MSD lens. People start questioning you, like, you've been doing stuff for the last 1-2 years. Where are the results? You know, show us the results. And that can be very nerve-wracking if people don't really get to understand the logic and how MSD really plays out in that space. Because of time, I'm going to ask, you know, if you still have any other reflections, please, you know, just type it in the chat. We'll be more than happy to, to learn from you and see what makes you nervous. But again, what we also want to say about this is, like, no one knows everything. I think Katie put that very well. We're all learning. I think at the beginning of this whole scheme, I already mentioned, you know, we are learning through this mentorship together. Don't only think the facilitators are here to give. We are here to learn as much as you can. Yesterday, the coffee cycle with all of you was really, you know, very interesting. When we had Melako and David share, you know, it's been a continued journey for them as well, learning. And then also, you know, we also just want to appreciate, like, new perspectives provide value. So There's no one who's like an expert, if they put it that way. So yeah, and you know, again, ask questions. Don't feel nervous. You know, if we say we want you to own the space, we want you to share your insights, and we want you to feel comfortable. You know, we want you to make, you know, to feel this is a safe space for anyone in this scheme. Yeah. So that's it for our opener. We're gonna start just very quickly. Today we're gonna have someone like a special guest with us joining, plus the rest of the facilitators. Katie Whitehouse, you guys are gonna meet her just in a bit. You know, hi Katie, she's waving to all of us if you can see. She's very excited. I think this is gonna be a really good session. So I really love that energy for starting the day. And you know, maybe just to get started, you know, today we're going to start getting to understand a little about markets, you know, like undertaking market systems analysis. You know, this is sort of a big thing that a lot of us are doing, or it's a big part of what an MSD program really carries, but also one of the aspects we still struggle with. And Katie has been doing tremendous work with us, you know, in the last couple of months, you know, just trying to see what kind of content we have, not just on the resource guide, but also how can we deliver this to teams and really break down that process for us to make it like really, you know, very simplified, but also much more enriching and meaningful to all of us. So welcome, Katie. You know, you're all going to meet in a bit. In terms of session two takeaways, I don't know if anyone wants to share, you know, just their reflections on session two that we have. Can I pick on anyone? Sinbeto, would you mind share what your reflection on the past session was?
I think we discussed on the basic principles, the key principle in the MSD, and oh my goodness, at the basic principle, and also the key feature of the MSD want to address those that sustainably impact, scale, and related issues.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything in particular that was striking for you in that particular conversation?
And that's, you know, when the MSD in Christ case, it one additional piece which came out is sustaining the market issues. How, you know, when in the crisis period of time, there's a crisis intervention which channel into one or another channel into through the direct delivery kind of approach. But in the MSD, how market system in crisis, how that can be maintained or done without affecting the existing market, was something touched me in the last discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting. I don't know if Alison, you want to drop in just 2 words into it, just on that marketing crisis reflection.
Yeah, it's interesting for you know, us as market systems practitioners. It's like we have the long run goals that we want to push towards, and I think, you know, Ethiopia team, you're very familiar with this. It's one of the things that I think is a really important detail that I think I struggle with is it's really understanding when we can be pushing for those long-term, understanding what our goal is. When are we pushing for a longer term sustainable change, and when are we trying to prevent setbacks in the market system? And just like, I think that's, I mean, back to things that make me nervous, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about our markets and crisis approach. It's like really always having that goal super clear, because it's great when we have the relationships and the networks and the understanding of all these actors. But figuring out when we really think we can push for those sustainable changes, and when we recognize that we're just trying to help help a local economy, a set of actors through a shock to support our target group.
Yeah, definitely. And again, if we all remember, just remember the four boxes that Alison presented. Like that's where we can sort of use a lot of our thinking on how to support markets in a crisis context. Yeah. Anyone wants to jump in with another reflection, or I can just pick on anyone? Isaac.
Yes, Daniel. Unfortunately, this is my first session I've attended, but following in closely now. I think I'll get on pace slowly.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, this is my first session.
Yeah. Susan has a reflection. You're welcome, Susan.
Thanks, Daniel. I think for me, it's really understanding that a core principle, one of the core principles around understanding the reasons why markets have failed, or the components making, contributing to market failure. And I think this taking us to the session we are about to go through today is so critical that, if an analysis is not done well, then you might find your team, focusing on the wrong things, which is really bad. And so, really understanding the root causes of market failures is so critical. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you've just, you've just created sort of that right segue into diving into what today's session is. So, I think, for the first two sessions, we've just been focusing around the foundations of MSD, looking at the core principles, looking at the markets in crises. We talked a little bit about like market system resilience. What does that look like? And also, thinking just around like the strategy, what are those elements for your market system? And so today we're going to dive straight into market systems analysis. And like I already mentioned, we have a special guest, Katie, who has been working with us for the last couple of months. She's experienced in this sector, in this field. She's already highlighted, some of the sectors she's worked on, wash and energy, which is really a very good experience, because even at Masico, I think we're very concentrated a lot on the ag side and the employment side. And it's just, I think Katie just brings that rightful level experience. So over to you, Katie. You're welcome.
Thanks, Daniel. So hi, everyone. Just quick background from me then, I suppose, so you know who I am. I previously to working in this sector, I worked in the private sector business for many years and specialized in business strategy, markets and sustainability in business operations. And that was when I first started looking at mobile for development. This was pre-mobile money days, when it was just starting, and a lot of my clients were looking into that. So the GSMA Foundation, Vodafone, Safaricom, etc., etc. And we've seen how that has snowballed over the last 15 years to what it is today. Goes back to the previous slide, Daniel. And I brought that learning into trying to improve how we think about market systems analysis and market systems development in what we do, both on this side and the development side, but the humanitarian side as well, where I've worked with a number of different actors. And my passion is bridging the divide. How do we look at that, sustaining the markets and building more resilience markets as well? So that featured obviously in the last session. So looking forward to speaking to you. Session 3 plan. Let's go on to the next thing, the next slide, Daniel. Great. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to talk very briefly about defining the program strategy, that anchor that will guide us through the entire of our market systems analysis. Then we're going to do a deep dive on target group profiling and market system selection very quickly, just to say how we start thinking about that within our program strategy. Then we'll start looking about all the different types of market system information that we need to gather across the analysis process. MSA is market systems analysis, if you see that coming up. And then we'll go into one of the hardest topics around doing market systems analysis, which is getting our market systems characteristics, looking at those constraints, capacities, incentives. So that's what we're going to go through today. There's quite a lot, but we're hoping that there's going to be a lot of energy to keep you all on board with us. As we said before, if there are questions, ask them, put them in the chat box, and there'll be plenty of points to ask us questions as well. Next slide, please. Just so you know where we are within the process today, this is our signpost slide, and we'll show you where we are in discussing all the bits of information and different processes that we're trying to do within the market systems analysis, okay? So you'll see this come up a lot throughout the session today. So what we're going to start with first is the program strategy, which you see at the top. And we're going to talk about the target group, impact objectives, and target market. And later in this, then we'll start to go into the market system information components that we want to find out a bit more information about for our market systems analysis. Next slide, please. And the next one after that. Great. So you'll probably recognize this picture from the session 2. A good program strategy guides our interventions to drive systemic change. Getting a good program strategy up front is extremely important, so that it anchors all the research that we do to getting us to the right types of interventions, to get to the right types of outcomes, to get to that impact that we were all so worried and talking about at the beginning of this session. So that's why we need this program strategy. And that's why we start there. Can we go on to the next slide? The program strategy is made up of 3 components: your target group, your impact objective, and your target market. So when we're trying to create our program strategy, these are the main focus areas. These are the main specific things that we need to get ready. Can you press again, please? We do this by articulating our impact objective or goal for a clearly defined, and that is very important, and we'll go into that in more detail soon, for a clearly defined target group through interventions within an appropriate market system, and an appropriate is important too, okay? And again, we'll go into why and how we select an appropriate market system later on. Next slide. Here's an example of a program strategy. The program seeks to sustainably increase water conservation of at least 18.5 million cubic meters by 2022. That's our impact objective. By focusing on water efficiency in both farmers and refugee and host household users. There's 2 target groups there. Within the northern region, a target area where groundwater reserves are under extreme pressure and exacerbated by the influx of refugees from Syria and the Jordan Valley in the agricultural sector, market system 1, and domestic use sector, market system 2. Now, this is an unusual program strategy because the impact objective is around water conservation. Often we're talking about increasing incomes or general well-being. The impact objective is slightly different. We see there are multiple target groups, there are multiple market systems, and there's also a target area specified as well, which can be useful, not always needed, but can be useful if you put in there to bound the scope of your work. So you're not necessarily implying you're trying to make change across a whole country or a whole city or a whole region, if actually you know there's a specific area that you're going to be targeting these interventions. Next slide, please. Now, there are 2 scenarios that we tend to come across with the program strategy. You'll either start with a program strategy that has already been defined by the donor, or you won't have a program strategy that you need to define yourself. Do not presume, if your donor proposal has defined the program strategy, that your donor knows anything about the area and whether this program strategy is the appropriate one to do the impact that it wants to see. So with that in mind, how might we sense check whether a program strategy that the donor has provided makes sense? Does anybody have any ideas? Oh, go back, don't show them the answers. Anybody got any ideas how you sense check? Just shout out, unmute and say an idea. And it doesn't matter if it's wrong, it's fine. Or I'll pick on something.
I'm going to pick on Chidima.
I think you do that using your results chain, so because it shows you the logic and how it contributes to progress.
Perhaps. Maybe you could even have more simple sense checks. Anybody got any other ideas? It's okay if you don't, this is a learning point.
So
Jamila?
Katie, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, the question is, how do you sense check questions? Like in terms
How
of
do you
like, the
sense
donor-
check a
Yeah.
predefined program strategy? Something your donor said, we want you
Okay.
to make this impact with this target group in this target market.
Okay, sometimes you do that based on the on-ground experience. If you have like if you know the area, the geography, and if you have other programs which has learning briefs or documents that shared of what worked and what didn't. So if you know the area, that could be one quick strategy to look at. Whereas if you don't know the area as well, you might do quick kind of dirty assessment in a way. If you don't know the area, if you don't have any background on how things are in that area.
Yeah, I love it. Quick and dirty. It really doesn't necessarily have to be something very deep dive and detailed if you're just sense checking. It's thinking about it sensibly as your team. Does this even make sense? If you click again at Daniel, here are some potential questions you could be asking yourself. Are there actually enough people in the target group to meet that impact goal? If they're saying they want to see 30,000 people have improved livelihoods, but in that target group, there aren't that many to realize that impact objective, and I have been on projects where this is the case, you need to go back to the donor and explain that to them. Or think about different ways that actually you might be able to reach that number, but it might be a different target group with a different impact objective in a different market system for that area. Does the target market make sense to achieve that impact objective? Have they actually selected the right market to actually achieve the impact that they want to see at the scale that they want to see? There might be a more appropriate market system, or you might need to tackle a couple of market systems at the same time. Does the geographic focus make sense that they've asked you to look at in that area? And also, are there any other programs already working there, either from a market systems development perspective, or are there humanitarian programs underway, considering the fragile context that we work in, that might undermine doing a market systems development project? We talk about market distortion. What kind of distributions are happening or services being already supplied by NGOs in the area that might mean an MSD project is just not the right thing to do in this area at the moment, though you could start talking about how to shift to something around recovery and resilience building in a different sense and set expectations in a different way. Hope that makes sense. Right, I'm going to move on to the next section and I'm going to hand over to Alison. And this is going to be the things to keep in mind whilst you're building your program strategy. So first we'll look at target group. Alison, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Katie. And I think you're going to keep driving, right?
It's Daniel driving at the moment.
Oh, Daniel. Okay, great. All right. So the first thing we need to do is to profile our target group for all these reasons that Katie just mentioned. You can go on to the next slide, Daniel. And so what I'm going to talk us through here is just basically the process that we're looking at following when we're doing this target group profiling. The first thing that we want to do is we want to build the basic profile of the target group. So we want to understand those basic wealth characteristics. And then I'm going to move through these other things. Then we're going to try and identify the key shocks and stresses affecting those target groups. So we're getting to another layer of understanding vulnerability. We want to map that and then update to have a detailed plan of the profile target group. Let's talk through this and break it down now. Can you go on to the next slide? Okay, so this is an example actually from Ethiopia a few years ago. The first thing we want to do is we want to build that basic wealth profile. And one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is why? Why is that something that's so important to do? And this is where granularity really starts to make sense. First of all, we want to validate that our target group is actually participating in the market system in the way that we think that they are as we move forward in our analysis. But we actually want to be specific about who we're targeting. So it's not just farmers in general, but is it going to be very poor farmers? Is it going to be poor farmers? Where do we have the types of numbers that are going to allow us to potentially support interventions that could reach scale? So this economic side of wealth profiling is going to be really valuable. There are some common tools that we use for this, things like the Progress Out of Poverty Index, and doing doing wealth categories. There's all of these tools that we have are something that we can continue to keep using, and are, I think, things that we should know are in our toolbox. They're not specific to MSD exclusively. Then moving on to the next stage, we want to identify what those, go on to the next slide, Daniel. So we do our basic wealth profiling. So maybe you've got a household economy analysis that you've done. A lot of times this does exist in secondary data, so you can start early by having this, just by looking around in your records and in existing reports. Then recognizing how important it is to understand these fragile contexts where we're operating, we want to identify the priority shocks and stresses for our target group. So you can look here, here's just an example, some that might happen at an individual level and some that might happen at a larger population level. A lot of these types of shocks and stresses we've learned a lot about through Mercy Corps' resilience approach, and they're really important to remember here as well, because vulnerability goes beyond the economic factors. It involves so many social factors as well. And the factors that allow people to cope and adapt to these shocks and stresses, things that are related to social capital, other demographic factors like gender and age, where people live. These things are going to be really important for understanding vulnerability, in addition to those basic economic factors we had on the last slide. Okay, next slide. And if any of you have been through Mercy Corps' core resilience training, you'll know that when we talk about shocks and stresses, we also want to talk about exposure and sensitivity to those shocks and stresses. So it's not just enough to know that a shock or a stress exists in an environment, but we need to understand how often a target group or a particular subgroup within our target group, and how long that group is going to be exposed, and sensitivity as well, how severely that group is going to be impacted once exposed. Okay, so a question for you all: what factors affect vulnerability beyond income wealth, beyond income and wealth to such shocks and stresses? I'm going to call on someone. All right, Jamila, I was about to call on you last time, so I'm going to call on you this time. When you think about vulnerability beyond income and wealth, what affects those factors that make you vulnerable to shocks and stresses?
Hi, Alison. I was like, Alison is gonna call my name right now.
Sure was.
So for me, I think beyond income and wealth, there is also access, because before the income and the wealth, you must have those pave a way to get into either a business or into having access to each and every area of the market.
I really like that answer. I'm going to keep picking on you. So what types of characteristics tend to affect that access, that determine whether or not someone tends to have that type of access?
Okay, there are many, however, and it depends on which aspect. So we might have insecurity, which can be a hitch to that. We might have let me say the know-how, now the information of having the access to whatever you're going to have access to, or whatever thematic area you want to have access to as well. And then also there is the also a hitch of, I don't want to say literacy, but at some point literacy also falls into it, beyond information as well.
Absolutely. And factors like your gender, your political connections can all affect these things, and your ability to deal with the insecurity. Yes. Thank you, Jamila, for letting me pick on you. All right, Daniel, we can move on to the next slide. Okay. Again, those of you who have been through some of our Resilience Foundations training, you'll recognize this as our grid that we use to map exposure and sensitivity to a shock or a stress. And you know, one of the things that we're going to keep reiterating throughout this course is the ways that we can really pull together the best of what we have in some of our resilience frameworks and tools to really strengthen our market systems development approach. And I have to say that I say this repeatedly, I think that this is one of the tools that can be really valuable. And when it comes to target group profiling, this is where it is. So we don't have to think of resilience and market systems development as these two big separate things. There are these really practical tools that help us pull these concepts together. So if you've seen this grid, you can see over here on the y-axis going up and down, we have the exposure level, and on the x-axis, we have the sensitivity. We just talked about those two concepts. Exposure, how often, how long you're exposed to it, and sensitivity, how strongly you're impacted by that shock and stress. If we say that our shock that we're dealing with is fuel shortage, we're actually going to go with a more economic shock here. We'll recognize that different groups are going to be affected differently. You can click once, Daniel. Okay, so we might see, for example, that women-headed households have both high exposure and high sensitivity in a given context, perhaps because they are going to lack the economic connections in an area that are going to allow them to access scarce fuel resources, for example. We can also see that there are a lot of other factors that are underlying these different characteristics that will really affect the exposure and sensitivity. We've got returnees and IDPs here. So people who are displaced, in some cases, maybe aren't moving around as much. They might have lower exposure and lower sensitivity, but they'll be more vulnerable to other shocks. So you can see that what's really important here is to recognize that there may, though, also be indirect effects that come off of this as well. Click once, Daniel. So there are a range of factors then that are affecting the vulnerability of these groups. And we've talked about these: wealth, perhaps residency status, gender. All of these are going to be the underlying factors that are going to end up relating to these impacts. So it's really important for us to continue to understand these through our profiling tools in order to have that more holistic picture of vulnerability. All right, next slide. Okay, and so bringing it all together, right? We had that initial output from a household economy analysis. We did our exposure sensitivity mapping. This is an example recently from our Sudan team looking at these components together. So looking at assets, looking at some economic factors, looking at exposure to shocks, and also looking at savings together in order to create a more full profile in terms of what vulnerability was going to look like for different target groups. And remember, we're using all of this to then move forward with our analysis and understand how big are these groups? Who are we really targeting? It's not just farmers, but are we going to be able to target the poor, the very poor? How many of perhaps the middle class might be included in order for us to reach some of those more vulnerable groups and those that are going to be more impacted by shocks and stresses? All right, so with that, I am going to, or am I, nope, I'm still in charge, right? Okay, so Katie gave us that overall map of what it is that we're looking at. We've talked about profiling our target group. We're gonna move quickly through some things here. But one of the next things that we then look at is we want to select our market systems. If we know who our target group is, now we say, okay, which market systems are these target groups operating within? Next slide. All right, so here you can see the map of where we are. We've looked at who our target group is. We understand what our impact objective is, usually something that's given to us. And then we look at the target markets. And I just want to highlight here that there are a few factors that we look at when selecting market systems. We want to look at the potential for impact. We want to look at relevance for our target group. So we have to have already figured out who our target group is. We want to look at the feasibility of interventions, something that Katie was just talking about when it comes to how many perhaps humanitarian interventions are going on. Is a market too weak or too thin for us to have an impact? And then a fourth category that we include when we do a market system selection is going to be resilience as well. So we're looking at the vulnerability of a particular market system, and we're also looking at how critical it's going to be to support people to cope and adapt to shocks. So you could take, for example, financial services. How vulnerable is a financial services market going to be in the context of a particular shock or the shocks that are prevalent in an area? And then also, how important is it going to be for resilience? Often we end up focusing on finance because it's such an important resilience capacity. So these are just some characteristics that we tend to look at. And I know for those of you who are part of the Nigeria team, you'll have seen this recently when you did the market system selection to kick off the Rural Resilience Program. Okay, next slide. All right. Am I introducing this or are you, Katie?
You're doing a grand job, Alison. I don't mind if you want to introduce it. I can, it's fine. What would you like to do?
How about you introduce it?
Okay, passing on the book. Right, okay, so thanks, Alison. So one of the things from session 2 was a request to provide more time for you as participants and project managers of these projects to talk to each other, to share your experiences, to get top tips and challenges that you're facing in the different contexts. So we're giving you this opportunity. This is for your chance to talk about a specific topic and set the agenda for what you want to talk about. So we're going to say, let's have a discussion about our experiences in building the profiles of target groups and trying to get that to that level of detail that Alison was just talking about in her presentation. We've got some suggested topics. You don't have to talk about these. Use what you want if you want to talk about those topics. What source of information might you have used? What challenges have you had in detailing those target groups? How did you establish the priority shocks and stresses, especially if there are lots of them? And how did you choose what vulnerability factors were the most important to prioritize in building those profiles? Those are some questions. You might have others. It might be process related, implementation, etc., etc. So we're going to break out into 4 groups. Alison, myself, Lorenz and Daniel will be there to help facilitate and guide, but we're not going to lead the conversation. So think about some things you'd want to ask your fellow colleagues that are in that breakout. We'll have 15 minutes, then we'll come back and do a bit of sharing before going into the next section. Okay, enjoy.
Sorry, how long for the breakout rooms?
15 minutes, please, with a timer a couple of minutes before the end. Waiting for some people. Oh yeah, okay, great. We've got everybody back. So quickly, 5 minutes. Would somebody from any one of the groups want to share what they learned from that session? What was something they didn't think about before that they've now know, or thought now it's something new? It was a ha-ha moment. Didn't think about that before. Don't be quiet, because I'll pick on someone. I know you're all talking.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Yes, Isa. Yeah, I was just trying to make a point in my room, a breakout room. I was just trying to compare the scenarios where you have already a donor, you have already a project that has already started, and that scenario when you are just new in the community and you want to find out what are the shocks and stresses. So comparing the two, I find that it would be very easier for you to make a profile for a new community where you have where you have more view of the new community compared to when you have to depend on what the donor has decided. Because what you see as vulnerability may not be vulnerability compared to the community where you are going to practice what you want to practice. But if it is a fresh community, if I'm to use fresh, you will find it easy to, and you even have more time. But when you have a proposal, you are time bound, and it may not be easy for you to do a comprehensive profiling. That is what I wanted to tell my group.
That is a great reflection. And I think, you know, as you're project managing these projects and talking to your donors and building the proposals, it's things to remember. You know, you might be given a predefined program strategy, but it might be useful to have in your back of your mind that actually it'd be very useful for us to do more detailed profiling about target group. How do I talk to our donor about that and why it's important as we go through the process, rather than just accepting this is what we need to have? Or how do I build a proposal so that I have the time within building my program strategy to do that more target group profiling if you're defining the program strategy yourself? It's a great point, Isaac. Has anybody else got any insights, something that was new that they hadn't thought about before? Don't all jump at once.
Or we'll start calling on people.
Facilitators, did you see anything interesting that you know one of your group members should talk about?
Well, that was already one of my group members, so somebody else should go first.
Lorenzo, Daniel.
Yeah, in my group, Mohamed Igale was talking about some of the challenges with the changing, actually doing the profiling, but then the changing demographics and the changing dynamics of the market, actually changing the situation, the profile of the target group within 6 months or a year. And so just how do you, the question, you know, how do you update that and how do you deal with that?
That's a great point. Did anybody have any solutions? Did anybody experience that problem from other groups and has any solutions to that? I think that one of the things I'll say here is that is complicated. Having the detail up front about the target group profiles helps us to assume what might happen in a shock or stress to preempt what might happen. But if we haven't thought about that beforehand, and they're 6 or 12 months into a project and something happens, we can't prepare in advance. We don't know what the implications are going to be on the market system, so we don't know what the implications are going to be on our interventions. But if we've thought about it all the way back at the beginning, we might be able to foresee it. We might be able to plan better for it. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind as well as to the value of understanding the vulnerability to shocks and stresses as we go through this process, given that the vast majority of projects are working in fragile contexts. And it's good to bear in mind that, considering the MSD approach, was pretty much developed in more stable context, right? You're trying to do something that's complicated in fragile contexts. So you need to think about doing it in a different way. And that's what we're talking about. Cool, let's move on to the next topic. Right, so now we're going to talk about information gathering across the market systems analysis process. So going back to our signpost, we talked up front about the program strategy, and that has defined our target group or groups, our impact objective, what we want to improve for our target groups, and our target markets, or markets. There might be multiple ones that we are working with to achieve that impact objective. Now, once we've got that program strategy, all of that data helps us focus where we need to do our market systems analysis. It creates the boundaries, the parameters for our research within our market systems analysis. So we've got 5 components below that we're going to go through right now. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because some of them you know already, but we'll go through them and see why we do them and what we're trying to get out of doing them. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the process. I'm missing a thing. Okay, we're going to talk about the process. So the process of market systems analysis, don't know why the slide looks, it's fine. The process of market systems analysis goes through 5 phases, and I don't know where my 5th one's gone, but I'm going to tell you where it is, what it is. We go through planning and program strategy, we're getting that boundary of what our research is. Then we create our starting point. This is around the market system information we might already know, maybe from secondary research, our reading, or maybe it's because we know it anyway. We've been working in the area as a team. Experience has told us this information. Then we use that knowledge to prepare our field work. Then we do our field work, and then we analyze the data that we've got at the end to look at what interventions we're going to do. That in its entirety is the market systems analysis process. It is not field research only. You need to do all this upfront stuff to feed into the market systems analysis as we go. And too often people think it's only field research. It is not, it's everything, okay? And as we go through that process, we start to narrow down and get more specific to what the root causes of the constraints. What is stopping that market system from achieving that impact or that change for the target group? We get more specific because we start to find more specific information. But we have to go through that process to get to it. So we get narrower and narrower and narrower, because we'll start broad. We've got quite a big amount of data, and then we start to follow the information that we're finding out to get to that root cause. The animation went horribly wrong on this slide. But there you go, it's all there now. So essentially, we're going through that whole process. And across the process, we're going to have these market systems components that we were talking about, those 5 things. And we're constantly iterating on them. So that those arrows at the side, right? We're going to be constantly evolving them. As we get more information through the process, we update them. We get a more specific picture that's to reality. Because normally our information at the beginning isn't necessarily reality. It's our assumptions, or it's stuff that we've read in a book that we think is up to date, but we're not quite sure whether it's still the reality of the moment. It can be useful to compare this whole process to an investigation, sort of a crime investigation, a whodunit. Somebody's committed a crime. How do you find out who has done that? And this can be useful for project managers if you're trying to very briefly articulate what a market systems approach is and why there's so much uncertainty, why you have to collect data in certain ways, why you have to talk to people about certain things. It can be useful if you're trying to articulate this to somebody that's not a market systems expert. Because you have to start with a broad and open mind. You don't know what the answer is. You don't know who the person is that committed the crime. You don't know the solution from the start. You need to do your background research to know who to talk to and about what, if you're a police officer trying to find out who committed the crime. You make observations You don't just talk to people, you're looking at things. You go to the crime scene, you have a look at what's happening, what's changed. You validate statements with your witnesses, the suspects, victims. You are interviewing them and asking questions and hearing things from other people, so you're updating the questions that you're asking. And if it makes sense, you follow new lines of inquiry. So perhaps somebody tells you something that you had no idea about before, but you know that's going to lead you to maybe a potential solution. So you might have to go and speak to somebody you didn't think you had to speak to before. That's why it's a really good way to think about this as a crime investigation, if you want to articulate this to someone else. And that last point in red is really important, because often we forget we can start talking to other people about new things that we're learning as we go through this process. Remember, adaptive management, it's not just about when we're doing the interventions, we are adapting as we're doing our market systems analysis as well. Right, I'm going to go into the components now. First of all, sometimes we get a bit overwhelmed with all the research that we've got to do. And so here are a few pointers from various different project managers on how to not get lost in it. Just as a pause, other facilitators, I can't see my chat right now, so if questions are coming up, please let me know.
We're on it.
Cool, thank you. So key pointer number one, start a parking lot for your information. If you know what type of information you're needing to collect, because you know what 5 components, these 5 market system components you're going to have to create are, as you start reading and talking to people, put things that you're hearing on Post-it notes, in a Word document. You might not know where to yet put it into your market system information components, but don't lose it. It's what I can tell you all of us do. I was talking to Lorenz about this a few weeks ago as well. When we first start reading documentation about a market system in a new area, we're reading and we're writing notes, put in our parking lot, because we don't quite know if it's useful information yet, but we think it might be, because we know we have to create these market system information components that we're going to go through in detail. So think about in the back of your mind, where do I store information I'm not quite sure where to put yet? Second thing, keep your research focused. Know why you're looking at something, know why you're asking a question, know when to stop. So look at your market system information components that we will go through. What is the information I'm trying to find and why? When do I not need to find out any more information? Be aware of that. Articulate it to yourself before you start your research, because otherwise you can start reading everything and you will collect way too much information. This is when we start to get market systems analysis reports. They're 100 pages long and they are not useful to anyone. So know what you're trying to find out and why. And that will also help you when it comes to field research. Ask yourself the question, why am I asking this person this question? Is it validating an assumption? Is it giving me new information about the market system? Or am I asking it because it was already in a Word document, but it actually has no relevance to this context at all? You need to be proactive in asking yourself these things, so your research is focused to the program strategy you have designed. Third point, spend less time on making perfect scoping outputs or those market system components, okay? Because they're going to change. We just said, right, in that process, they're going to go through a process and they're going to constantly update as you get new information. So they do not need to be perfect at the start. They need to be creating your starting point for more research, but they do not need to be perfect. And the last point is, if you don't have any secondary resources, if you've never worked in that area before, which by the way is most of the time for a lot of us, it is okay. Use your collective work knowledge within your team. Create assumptions, but know what assumptions you're making, note them down, and work out how you are going to validate them through your field research. You might not have a lot of information to start off with at this point, but you can build it up as you go along. Isaac, you have a hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted on the third point of spending less time on making perfect scoping out.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yes, I wanted just you to help me to give an example on the third bullet about spending less time on making perfect scoping out outputs as they will change. Do you have like a practical example like in the field?
For me, it's more, you might say, for instance, create a market system map, which has, from your head and from what you might have read, some market actors and how they work with each other. And then you stop there. That's come from a bit of reading and you've talked to your team. You don't need to make it perfect. You might not know what quantities of flows are happening. You might not know who else they talk to, but that will come as you start to ask questions in your field research. You will find out new information about your market system map, and you will find out if there are more market actors or if the flows are wrong. Alison, I've noticed you were like, yes, less perfect scoping outputs. Are there any thoughts that you have to answer that question?
Well, I actually just want to call out, this was something that Namona brought up when we were in our breakout session of like, you see sometimes the secondary information and it's not accurate to your context. So let's be honest, a lot of times information is either outdated or, we don't trust the quality of it as well. So it doesn't mean that we need to make a pretty report before we get into our final report. It's like, keep in mind, if you look at looks like poverty is dropping in a straight line over the past 10 years, that might make you wonder about the quality of the data underneath. So just not thinking of this as like more a note-taking phase rather than you're putting together a report before your report. And I also just want to flag, Jamila just asked a question. Do you want to ask us out loud? She said, Katie, is it okay while conducting your research to as well have a why analysis to better understand your research? Jamila, do you want to share a bit more about that question?
Okay, so when Katie was talking, she was talking about having a cumbersome research report and also understanding why you are doing this research to be able to be focused on what you're researching on. So I'm just reflecting, is it because in a context where it's actually different in different contexts. So in a context where you don't even have the primary data and then you have a secondary data which is not accurate, is it possible to actually understand why is this thing not happening in this location before even conducting, or besides conducted with your research?
If we're looking at secondary research, we might not be able to find out why. We might be able to make assumptions as to why that we validate in our field research, and keep on asking the why as we do our field research. And I think sometimes you might not be able to get all the data you need even from the field research to get to the root cause. You're trying your best to get there, but if you're not quite sure if it is, again, it's just flagging that, being very aware that we need to do more research. It might be that you do the intervention to see if there is actually any change, but from starting the intervention, you start to figure out, oh no, that's the root cause. Now we know why something isn't necessarily working. And that's where your adaptive management comes in. You reorientate the way you do that intervention, because you're learning still when you're doing your interventions. It's still a diagnosis process, really. That's why we have continuous MEL happening whilst we're doing interventions, because through the market systems analysis, we get a picture of what the market system is working like, but it's still to an extent a theory that we have to test when we do our interventions. So we'll always be a question mark as to, have we got this right, until we see the impacts of our interventions, and adapting those interventions that therefore is still important. Last thing on that is what I wanted to say about the why is, whilst we do our market systems analysis, we're always asking ourselves, why are things happening, to try and get to the root cause. Why are you doing this in this way? Why is the system acting in this way? you can use that and apply that same technique to yourselves. Why am I asking this question? What is it actually asking for me from my research content? Keep asking yourselves why as you're going through this process, so you know if you're asking the right sort of things or you don't need to be asking this anymore. Is there any more questions, or are we okay to move on? Oh, Lorenz has his hand. No, it hasn't. That's wrong. I can't see. Okay, right. I'll move on. But if there's any more questions later on, you'll have chances to ask them. So let's go into the market system components themselves. Situational summary. So this is often what we're doing with the other components is we'll be visualizing data in a certain way, but this one is about background reading. You're trying to find out context specific trends that will influence market systems. So the location, the politics, trends in economics, environment, social, and technology. It helps us understand why that market system, that target market, is doing what it's doing in that kind of way from background reading that we're doing. And it might give us a bit more information about the shocks and stresses that we've identified as priorities, what maybe are the coping mechanisms the target group or the market system, market actors employ in those shocks and stresses, what are the seasonality patterns, if anything, what's happened before in terms of how they've adapted. And also from the other trends, or economics, environment, social, technology, you might start to see there are specific questions that you might be wanting to ask certain market actors around technologies that could be addressing a potential problem that you're seeing with the target group, or the fact that maybe there's environmental challenges that are causing problems with agriculture. This background reading is where you start to really start putting your parking lot information in. It's things that you think you might want to ask your market actors, your target group, the suppliers at some point. At this point, there's two things I also want you to think about. If you're working in an area that hasn't got a lot of secondary research already, because there's not a lot of studies there, but you are working in you know what market system you're working in, have a look and think, are there other countries or other regions that have similar shock profiles, have similar market systems? Is there anything I could assume or learn from that could help inform me about our market system, that could help me create some questions to investigate when I go and do my field research? So you might not have secondary research that is specific to your area, but there might be some that exists from elsewhere that you can apply. I did that for Uganda when I was working with Mercy Corps on the Bidi Bidi energy project. So nobody had done it in Bidi Bidi before, but they had another part in Uganda. And that gave us a lot of starting points to start asking some questions. So you know it's an assumption from another area, but can still help you go in the right, start in the right direction. Second thing, avoid copying and pasting prose from secondary research for your reports and for this part of the work. I cannot tell you how angry I get when I read pages and pages of information that has clearly just been copied and pasted and referenced from another source, and you're saying that's insights. That is not insights. You read it, you extract what is useful to this project, and sometimes that's easiest to do in bullet points. Just take what is useful, what is relevant to your project, say why it is useful, and that is your insight. You can reference that secondary resource to find out more information, but why am I reading this? If I read 2 pages of trends, economic trends, what I really want to know is that is the economic trend. This is why it's useful for this market system project. You can probably say it in a quarter of the text. So understand what you are putting into your reports, why you're putting it there, what it is helping you to think about in your research. Finishing that one. Oh, no, not finishing that one, arrows. This part of the research helps you with every other component because it's going to give you information that informs all the other components. You might get ideas of market actors to talk to. You might get ideas of flows that are happening in the market system because of certain trends you're reading about. Be mindful of that. That is why the parking lot of information is really important. Next one, market system donut. Can anyone on the call tell me why we do this? We talked about donuts last time, so the answer's already been given to you. Who can remember why we do this?
Everybody loves a donut.
Everybody knows the donut.
Should we call on someone?
Yeah, George. George, why do we create market system donuts? Can't stay silent forever, George. Oh, we know you're not on the call.
I'm going to go back and mark George's absent.
Right, we're going to have to see if George is here later, if he's gone for a toilet break. Nimona, do you know why we do market system donuts?
I can say like maybe one or two things that comes on the top. One thing we do the market system donut is to easily understand the players in the market system, the actors in the market system, the rules, the norms, and the core of the market as well.
Super, great answer, thank you. Yep, we easily articulate what the market system looks like. It's a visualization of a lot of data in a simple way. It helps us articulate where we want to prioritize our research in that market system. So it helps us focus our research. Who are we talking to, particularly with the supporting functions and rules, those priority ones, and why have we done that? What's the justification for prioritizing that in the donut? That's that. I'm not going to go into more information about that one. Market actor list. Why do we create this? Let's go for another person. Who's it going to be?
How about David?
David.
I bet the market actor list is a list of all the actors in the market performing various functions in the market. So you need to have a list of these market actors so that you can be able to know who you are going to target with your research, with your who are you going to question, so that you understand the market better. So you need to have a basic list of the market actors, which are usually key actors who perform functions in the market that you are targeting. Thank you.
Great answer. And in summary, it helps us plan our fieldwork strategy, who we need to talk to, and starts building a catalogue of known and unknown. Always remember, you will be updating this, so you might find out about new people, market actors in your market system. And to go into a little bit more detail on this, so you might have a supporting function, such as information on job availability. Then you think about the market actor groups that would exist in providing that service, that function. So in this, for providing information on job availability, maybe it's employment agencies or employment brokers, could also be the media as well. But to really understand who exists within those groups, we also need to break it down to the next level. So employment agencies, there might be formal, but there might be informal ones as well. In the media, it's not just one type of media. It might be newspapers, radios, community job boards. Those are various different things that exist, levels that exist within those market actor groups. And they're important to talk about because their size and their functionality and who they actually accommodate in providing that service will differ. And that helps us later on to understand the capacities, constraints, and incentives for change within those systems. Now, that's why we try and break it down to those levels to understand the different way these guys work and how that gives us an overall picture of the performance. It is also useful at this phase as well to be able to just note in those lists that you're making who we would call lead actors and who would be intermediary versus local actors. Can anybody give me a definition of those? Jamila?
Okay. So I'll still for the love of my program, I'll still use my program as an instance. So for the lead actors, in case of my program, we use the lead firm, which is the Amo Farm, whom are the sole producers of the Noila chicken. And then for the lead versus intermediary, which is the local actors, are those entrepreneurs within the locations where the program is being implemented.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Oh, two participants raise their hands.
Entrepreneurs to actually go into or speak with the community.
Okay, I don't know if everybody could hear that. I don't know. I got a little bit of a breaking. So lead actors, just as a summary, working more so national level, large scale actors can potentially reach a number of people. Intermediary help to connect between national, regional level down to the local level. And then local actors are your local actors that are near your target group. There are some raised hands. Are there some other questions?
Can I go? So
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of definition, yes, you're right. But I might add, in terms of the context you would work, sometimes the way you define lead firm or an intermediate firm depend on the players and the type of kind of engagement you would
This
have.
thing to continue talking
So for example, in programs that you are implementing in remote areas, the lead firms might not be the national level, engaged, market actors. They might be, those you believe can really stimulate the market. And in terms of engagement, the type of investment probably you'd make as a program is huge. So that's at least how we are trying to define lead firms. Yes, the definition is correct, but when you come and implement it in programs, it depends on the type of investment and the type of stimulation they would create within that market. I just want to share that.
Love that contextualization point. Thank you very much for sharing that. Was there a second point? Did I see a second hand, or are we done? Facilitators, guide me.
Okay, so maybe just to add to what she just said, this is actually, it's also been an issue, trying to define based on the different contexts. So one of the things that we had started doing on rural resilience was trying to pull together like a compendium of all of these definitions based on the context. So yeah, it's something that we're already doing, and hopefully so that when anybody comes, it's easy to be able to understand, when we say lead firms or lead actors, it's easy to understand based on our context. So yeah, we're developing a compendium as well.
So that would be great to see when there's a compendium. Maybe we could put that out as an example for everybody on the mentorship scheme so they can see the differences. Just sharing that back to the facilitators. Action point. Isaac?
Yes, I just wanted to ask about, someone brought some point about contextualization, and you find that you may be several actors or several, maybe can I call several organizations working within, you gave an example of BDBD settlement. You are several actors there. And when you are doing your assessment, the person, the actor you are considering intermediary, another person is taking them as a lead actor. Yet you are in the same market system. How would that would that cause conflict, or how would that disorganize the marketing system? What do you think about that?
If I understood the question right, it was in the context of biddy. Sorry, Isaac, if I didn't understand it right. Now, looking at that context, because we're in what I call an open settlement, in terms of the market system was open for trading and people could get access to larger markets within Uganda, as opposed to a closed refugee camp where government policy might not be allowing free trade to happen. The lead actor for that was actually more regional actors, even though we're in this context where actually you might think there would be lead actors that were more local, but that the trade was happening, those services and goods were still happening at a regional level for the energy products and services that we were looking at bringing into that settlement. Then we had certain actors that were acting as intermediaries between more Ugandan specific regional market actors bringing those services in, and then local kiosks and engineers and whatnot that were giving the goods and services. So that's how it kind of worked in that context. Hope that answered the question. I'm going to pause any more questions on this for now, because we're running a little bit behind, but I want you to make sure, if you guys have got any more notes on market actor lists, start writing them into the chat box, because we can pick them up later or in the next session as well.
Katie, can I just say something quickly?
Yeah.
Speaking to the next section, just a little bit of like a signpost here. One of the, you know, as Katie was saying, we ask ourselves, why do we care about these things? So why are we thinking about categorizing these actors? In session 4, we're going to talk a little bit more about market systems resilience. So we're thinking about lead and intermediary actors in 2 ways. One, who are going to be our potential leverage points in terms of who we want to partner with to create certain changes in the market. And I think, Meseret, your comments were somewhat related to that. And then also a big thing that the Nigeria team, which has been digging in on, which is that shocks and stresses tend to affect actors at these different levels as their size and geography is different. Shocks and stresses and the vulnerability of these market actors, the differential vulnerability of these market actors is different as well. So we'll talk more about that next time, but it's just, you know, why do we care about these types of categorizations? There's a couple of reasons. Back over to you, Katie.
That's okay, thank you. Right, the last thing that we're going to talk about, market system map. So we create a market system map, and it establishes the flows in the system between different market actors, and perhaps what assumptions we want to make about those flows, how big they are, how regular are they, illegal, are they legal, and who do they flow between. It also might expose potential issues to investigate further, and you can also create a market system map for how things usually look, and then if there is a shock or stress, and how things that might change because of that as well, just to keep in the back of your mind. So this could be one of your market system maps. This is what a market system map looks like. And there might be things that, as I just said, exposed through that, just by creating that map itself, that you look at and go, oh, should we investigate this a little bit further? Should we ask a question about this? For example, livestock producers, that is your target group here in this context, but we grouped it up as one big thing. Somebody didn't do their target group profiling. So do we need to understand if those flows are the same for better off producers and poorer producers? Does it change at all? And in this as well, you can only see that there's a link to collectors and brokers. Is there a power issue here that we need to discuss more? We'll talk about power in another session. And looking at this map, if maybe a priority shock was changes in prices to exports, the vast majority of livestock goods that are going through this market system go to foreign exports. So if there was a shock in the price, or if they change the regulations on quality of livestock, what could that mean for the whole market system? This isn't about you getting the answers from the market system map. This is being able to look at a market system map and go, how does this apply to my program strategy? How does this apply to that target group? How does it apply to our target market and the vulnerability of it? Okay. Finally, we are going to go into market system characteristics, and this is one that we're going to deep dive on right now. All of the components that you will have found information at before will also contribute to this. They'll help us think about this in different ways. And we're going to look at the market system characteristics in 2 ways. In this session today, in session 3, we're going to look at how it usually performs. And in session 4, next week, we're going to talk about how does it react and perform in a shock or stress state. I'm going to skip that and we're going to go to this. Right, so taking a pause, stand up if you can, just do this a bit because we've given you loads of information. I was going to give you a little bit of a break, but we're running behind, so you can stand up and move about and listen to me because you can still hear me, but I'm standing up the whole time doing this. Yes, doing a bit of this. If we were in a physical environment, I'd have you running around the room or something. Right, now we're going to go into market systems characteristics. I hope your brains aren't exploding. I know that we've talked through a lot already today. An exchange may be performing well for some, but not for our target group. Got a donut here. What do we mean by an exchange when I say that? Anybody?
Is it exchange of goods and services? Just
say that again.
Exchange of goods and service.
An exchange of goods and services, yes, within our target market. So the exchange is the exchange of goods and services from the demand side to the supply side of a goods or services that we are focusing on in our program strategy. So maybe it's, for example, an exchange of energy services, and it might not be performing well for the target group because there's a lack of access to affordable and quality energy services. There might be energy services happening in that donut. It's just our target group, which is part of the demand, isn't getting any of that, or they're getting very highly priced and low quality energy services. And that is what we're trying to improve in that exchange. We want to improve the performance of that exchange for our target group. Now we know from session 2 that SFRs, when you see that from now on, that means supporting functions and rules, because I do not want to type it all of the time. Everyone in this group should know that SFR from now on is supporting function and rule. Use it. Saves you a lot of typing. So we know from session 2 that SFR, supporting functions and rules, influence how well that exchange works for our target group. So we know that supporting function rules in that donut, we've got the finance, transport, gender norms, and how they work with our target group or suppliers affects how that exchange happens. It affects the price, the access, the quality. And within those supporting functions and rules, we want to understand how they're working and why. So we want to know their capacities. What do they currently provide and to who? Can our target group actually even access them, or our supply side even access them? The incentives. Why do they do this already? What drives that behavior of what they currently do and what they provide? And the constraints. What is preventing those supporting functions and rules from providing better services to our target groups or suppliers, which, if they did, might have a better impact on the exchange in terms of maybe driving down the costs of the goods of the exchange or improving the quality of the exchange? That's our starting point. We are going to go into a breakout now, so I can stop talking for a little bit. So, introduction to your breakout exercise. We've just seen a market system map. This is a different one. This is a financial services market system map. Do not panic if you do not know anything about financial services. That is fine. You do not need to be an expert. I'm not an expert. I know enough. That's it. In here, you can see there's some insurance companies, some commercial banks. There's a microfinance institute group, and they provide money to some large enterprises and small micro enterprises. There's some mobile banking agents. And at the bottom, we've got host and refugee producers. Those are going to be our target group. Your exercise, your breakout exercise is going to be a little bit shorter. We're going to make it 20 minutes because we're running a little bit behind. But what we want you to do is use that market system map to imagine you are those refugee and host producers. You're going to be female refugee and host producers, and you're going to have a little bit of a think about why they might need access to finance. And your facilitators will take you through that. And then after thinking about that, you're going to imagine you're the microfinance institution and discuss how they work and what capacities, constraints, and incentives they might have for working with our target group. So, taking a pause, if you don't quite understand, your facilitators all know what we're going to go through. We're going to guide you through the process. Emily, could you put everybody into breakout rooms and also send the, but before you do that, could you just post the link to the slides so everybody has access to them? That come through? The slides, the breakout slides?
Yep. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Yep. So everyone, we know that you'll probably want to flick back to this and then back to this and then back to this as we're going through this discussion. We've put the slides into a Google Drive for you so you can have that on the side whilst you're participating in the discussion, and your facilitators will also share the screen. And there'll also be some tables where you can make some notes if you want to about your discussions as well in those Google slides. So before we break out, if you want to click on the link that Emily's just shared, so you've got it up, and open it, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here in 20 minutes or so.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. Hello, everyone.
We were
You were deeply in her discussion.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Just pulled out of a beautiful dream, you know?
Can you still see? I don't think you can still see my screen share, can you? There we go, we'll bring it back up. Well, I'm glad everybody was having such a good discussion. If we want, well, we'll be coming back to discussing these sort of things in the next session, so you can continue then as well. But I'm glad there was such good discussion. Sorry we couldn't take as much time, but that's because you were all asking really great questions earlier, so we didn't want to skip through them, so that's fine. Let's take a couple of minutes now, given you are having such amazing discussions. Someone from Lorenz's group, tell me what you were thinking about. What was a learning or an insight you hadn't really thought about, either from the target group or the market actor? Give me something. And Lorenz, if nobody speaks, pick someone from your group. Oh, handing it to Lorenz.
I see Meseret here, so I'm going to pick on Meseret.
Yeah, so we were trying to look at like the incentives and the capacities of what actually could hinder them in terms of providing services for our target group, and it kind of requires us to think from the business perspective and really think about what is the bottom line for the businesses, for the MFIs, even if yes, they do have social responsibility, but their main aim is actually to make profit. So why do they don't serve the community? And the discussion around the business case for those MFIs, what to provide services for our target group, and actually in terms of both human and technology capacities to serve those type of product, to design new products and services that are maybe outside the main framework for how they provide services to their usual suspects. So all those require investment, and it requires cost, and transaction costs might be very high to serve a small groups that are only bringing a small pie of profit. So we were discussing from the MFI side, from financial institution side, these things need to be considered before we kind of say, why are you not providing the services to our target group?
Love it. I love that. The empathy with the perspective of the business, the market actor is fantastic, and understanding what is driving their behavior and seeing a constraint that could be, they just don't know the consumer. So they haven't got those products and services. And if they have to invest into doing that. And why would any of us invest in doing something when we don't know if we're going to make any money from it? No one would. So understanding that that is a gap in the knowledge, that might be, maybe that's the incentive, is proving an ability to pay, to incentivize a change in products and services. I'm going to nominate Isaac, because we're talking about incentives, to suggest another incentive that he said at the end of our session, where I was like, oh, yes. What was the other incentive to address a constraint, Isaac?
Yes, I had just started talking about involving the government to, it's like an advocacy to show that this microfinance support center is able to support the consumers of the product. I was about to give an example of if it's a refugee settlement, we can look at not only looking at the refugees, but also look at the host communities. In some countries, like in Uganda, there is that rehope strategy where they consider, maybe we are considering targeting 70% of the refugees and 30% of the host community in any intervention. So as we advocate with the government, we make sure that we are showing them that much as this is targeting the refugees, since it's a market system, still it will come back to the host community. So if such services are provided to all the beneficiaries or to all the targeted participants, it will be able to help to push up the market system by supporting the refugee, the target beneficiaries. Those are the refugees. So the advocacy is looking at targeting both the host and the refugees, and government cannot fail to buy that.
Thank you. So we're bringing in another way of incentivizing, maybe through regulation and lobbying with government actors that can shift some incentives for the financial services to start supporting both refugee and host consumers, particularly as maybe refugees don't have access to local host financial services. One last point from Alison's group. Alison, who do you nominate?
I think that, just following this thread, I'm going to nominate Chidima to talk about something she was mentioning. We were talking about similar conversation around understanding the incentives or making the business case to the MFI, but then we were also talking about what about the potential role of other financial service providers if it's not going to work with the MFI directly. So Chidima, do you want to share some of the reflections you were talking about?
Yeah, okay, I think you've said it all, but basically I think we're just saying that sometimes some of these financial institutions, formal, informal, they might not be willing to lend and support the target markets like that. So one of the things that we're looking at, could they resource different functions now to the other actors within the markets, So those are things that we're just looking at. How can they source out these functions to the other key players that directly serve, the participants or the beneficiaries? And so I think that's it. Alison has already said a lot about that. So yeah. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, I'm glad there are so many interesting insights. I hope everybody took something away from that. But we have 15 minutes left and I have 20 minutes worth of material. So if I go fast, you just note what you're not understanding, and we will have a session when we start on Tuesday to go over anything that you don't quite understand. But we need to get to the end of the slides so you know how to prepare for the next session, okay? Right. So there is a process for understanding our market system characteristics. I'm going to take us through that and help us. We've shown how easy it is to do when you start thinking through the process by the way that that breakout exercise was done. Let's just formalize it a little bit. So we want to know what the current performance of the exchange, that movement of goods and services is. And then we need to know what needs to change in our supporting functions and rules to improve that exchange. And then we want to know, why aren't they serving that need already? Why aren't they already accommodating that change that is needed? The first two areas of investigation, we can find out from talking to the demand and the supply sides of our donut on each side, those things that are moving those goods and services from demand to supply, and your target group will fit in either one of those as well. And the last one is really talking to our supporting functions and rules, market actors. That's who we're going to find out more information from. Okay, so think about this as we're thinking, who do we need to ask questions of when it comes to our field research? What do we know? We think we know about them now from our secondary research or our collective team understanding. What might we need to ask them when we get to our field research? So let's go through each one of these steps, or these 3 steps, in a little bit more detail. Current performance of the exchange. What details, what defines that exchange are criteria, categories such as accessibility to those goods and services, inclusivity. Does it cater for everyone? Does it only cater towards men and not the disabled, for instance? Affordability, so the prices of these goods and services. Quality, are the products and services safe and reliable? Quality is an interesting one if you're looking at labour markets. It might not be around safety and reliability. It could be that labour is the market, so it's the quality of those that are job seeking. What educational levels and skills and experiences do they have to be able to get the jobs that we know are in that market system? That's the quality when you look at a labour market system. Availability, is there enough of the goods and services out there to meet the target group needs? That is the performance of the exchange. Those different definitions those different criteria is why we talk to the demand and supply side to understand what's the current performance. How is it currently working? So we're going to be wanting to ask, what is actually exchanged and why? Between whom and why? And how is it exchanged and why? So what is actually exchanged is getting specific on that good or service. It might be that you really are very interested in a certain type of good and service because you know that's better for everyone, but what is currently happening is not that. So we need to know that current picture and why they're currently doing it that way, because then we start to understand what isn't working in the system, why they haven't chosen a different option before. And it might be a really sensible thing, and keeping it as is, as like that is the thing to do, but we don't know that. So we need to ask the right questions to understand why it's doing what it's doing right now. Last point, warning flag thing. If I was trying to find out the performance of the exchange, I could say access. It's too hard to access the retailers. That is why I can't get the good or service I need. But why is it too hard to access the retailers? Remember, we're always getting to why. In this example, it's too hard to access retailers due to cost of travel to markets and cities where those goods and services exist. So the next bit that's important to us is the proximity. That was the issue. That is meaning that currently the market system is working like that. That exchange is working like that. So that's the first point. Second point, what needs to change in the supporting functions and rules to improve the exchange? So for example, when we're talking to the demand and supply side, we're trying to find out, just like in our example, our breakout session, why do they need finance? What is it? What is the point of it? Can they access it? Is the right product there? What is constraining them from accessing? Is it accessibility? Is it the information? Are they illiterate and therefore can't understand what products and services exist, etc., etc., etc.? And by understanding what the demand or supply side need for these supporting functions and rules to help them work better, we start to understand the influence of these poorly accessing these services and goods, or the right services and goods from the supporting functions. in terms of the impact on the exchange. So for instance, the quality, so say if we went for the rice producers, the quality of the rice is poor. The reason is that you've not got good seeds, you need better input. But what you need is access to finance to be able to invest in getting better quality seed so that you can plant it, sell better quality rice, make more money, pay back the finance. But at the moment, nobody's got access to finance. So they can't ever improve the quality of their rice. So they can't sell it for more money to get better profits. That is the connection. We want to understand what the impact is of not being able to access the finance here on that overall exchange and why they can't. Okay. And then the third point, this is also exclamation mark, very important. When you start to get to that level of detail, when you're talking to the demand and the supply side, you start to find out specific questions you can start asking your market actors. Make a note. If you're talking in the field to your target group, they're probably telling you the questions you need to ask the market actors. Be noting that down and updating your surveys accordingly. Finally, why are the supporting functions and rules not serving this need already? And we just did that in the exercise. So you've talked to the demand and supply side, and now you're going to talk to your supporting functions and rules, find out what they're currently doing, their capacity, why they do it in that way, understand the constraints, and what are the incentives for them doing what they do. That's how we get to this point, but more specifically asking them questions that are relevant to that exchange and the impact it's having on the performance of that exchange. So we have to go through that process of understanding what's happening in the exchange for the demand and supply side to really get to the constraints, capacities, and incentives for the supporting functions and rules to know what to change in it. It's that process. I know that's a lot. You can come back to and listen to me later because we're recorded and you can listen to me before the next session. Last point, go beyond the obvious. On capacities, look beyond your target group. So in that exercise, we saw that the MFI was already supplying services to enterprises. So it might have capacity to do certain things. So it's finding out why they're not using that capacity to reach the needs of the target group. Is there a constraint inhibiting them, or is there no incentive to? Meseret just showed a really good example from the exercise to show that. Constraints. For systemic change, we need to find the root cause of the constraint. So keep asking why. For example, we don't serve that area. Why don't you serve it? It's too costly. Why? Because people buy very small orders. Why? Because they don't think they can sell any units. There you're starting to find out that there's a perception of low demand. So nobody's sending out bulk orders. So the cost of goods remains high. But you wouldn't have got to that if you'd have stayed at it's costly. You'd have just assumed it's unaffordable to do. Get to that root constraint. Why, and why? The 5 whys. Finally, incentives. They're not limited to profitability or affordability. It could also be that an incentive is information, power, reputation, social status, or social norms. So put yourself in that market actor's shoes. Think about what might be driving their behavior. Not got any time for questions, sorry. I'll get through to the end. If you have questions, I will stay online, but I know that a lot of you have to go on to other workshops and things. But if you have questions at the end, I'll stay online and happily answer them. Let's close up. Next time, we're going to discuss how the target market system reacts in a shock or stress state. So we've just looked at how to assess it in a normal, how it usually performs, how it's usually doing things. So you're going to have some homework. So this is the homework. What we're saying here is that a shock that's going to have happened is COVID-19. This is a shock that everybody has experienced. That's why we've chosen this. And what we want you to do is look back at that market system map of financial services and think about how the market actors might function differently. What is the impact and vulnerability of those market actors? So here you can see there's a table. We're going to send this out to you in email shortly. Just have a think. What would be the vulnerability of that market actor to COVID-19, or the impacts of COVID-19, the changes that has ensued because of it? So what's the impact on their capacity? What they currently do? What's the impact on what they currently do? What would they do to mitigate that risk? How can they change? And why would they want to? What are the incentives to be able to do that? And then if you have time, have a think about what the impact therefore is on the target group based on how that market actor is changing their behavior and changing what they do. So that's going to be your homework. It's going to be sent out in email. If you have questions about it, just respond back and we can clarify anything to you. Please do it, because session 4 is going to start with this. So we will know if you've done it or not. You don't have to have extremely detailed answers. It's not an exam. Just have a think about it so you come prepared for having a discussion about it. So, got a couple of minutes left. Quick popcorn. Defining the program strategy. What was someone's key takeaway from that? What did you take away? What was something you didn't know before and now you're thinking about it? Anyone? Quickly, otherwise you're staying on this call and getting late into your next one.
Should we call on someone?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Sumpento.
Something new that you learned. Nobody's learned anything new, Alison.
Can I go? Maybe we're lifting you hanging there.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, I think in terms of really evaluating predefined program strategies that are handed to us by donors has been a great takeaway in terms of defining the program strategy.
Thank you. Thanks, Meseret. On the detailed target group profiling, what has somebody taken away from that? And I know you've discussed it because we did a breakout session on it. Somebody's got to have learned something new. Anyone come off mute?
I can jump in on behalf of my group.
Yes, please, Alison.
we were talking about when the information might not be so good. So not to go too detailed when you're doing your initial target group profiling. Sometimes it's going to take the detailed follow-up when you're in interventions.
So it's again something that's going to keep updating as you go through the market systems analysis. Your target group will also, the profiling will update. Anything about the information gathering? Go on.
I just wanted to still contribute on that, on number 2, about being focused. We talked about during the profiling, you have to stay focused on why you are doing that. Otherwise, if you don't get focused, it may not, you may not come out with a good profiling. Then also something we talked about was about vulnerability is very relative. What you call vulnerability, you have to be cautious about who is vulnerable and as you do that profiling.
Great, it's a fantastic takeaway. On the 3rd section, the information gathering, as we were going through those dots. So the situational summary, the market system map, the market actor list. Anybody taken anything new away from that? There were lots of questions, so I think you have.
So to say a few things on that, like the first phase of it, situation analysis, contribute to all of it. So when we do situation analysis, we have to be careful and we have to get as much as information possible because we are doing all of the phases, including that.
The thinking, making sure that you're putting it into a parking lot to help inform stuff, but being specific as well. Knowing why you are analyzing that bit. Why is that important to this market system situation? Okay. And then the last thing that we were just talking about, the market system characteristics and that breakout exercise. What was a key learning for someone? Anyone? Susan? Susan, did you take away anything from that last section?
She's hiding.
Katie, I can jump in.
Yeah.
If you'd like me to. I think it was a really good point around not just evaluating the market system performance as just in general, but specific the performance in relation to your target group.
Great. I think that's a great takeaway. Okay, so we're at the end. And the one thing that we want to say before next week is we want you to make us smile next week. So next week, it's Christmas. We know not everybody celebrates Christmas, so it doesn't matter. We just want to have a bit of fun. It's been a tiring year, and you're also getting a lot of learning information at the end of the year from us. So for next session, we'd like to invite you to wear something silly. It can be a Christmas hat, a jumper, it can be anything that's just silly. And we'd love to see you on camera to make us smile. And so we can say happy holidays to everybody in the team and on the mentorship scheme. So please remember to do that. I would like to say that there's a prize for the funniest thing, but you'll have to ask Alison about that. But look for something, and facilitators, you're especially on point to find something that's funny, that's going to make us laugh.
The prize is extra TSU time, right, Alison?
I mean, I don't know. That's going to be up to you, Lorenz.
So
I don't know when I became put in charge of prizes.
We'll let them think about that, everyone. But thank you very much for your time and attention today and engagement in the breakouts as well. I hope there's been some really interesting learnings and conversations. If you have questions and can stay on the line, I'll stay on the line for the next 5 minutes or so to do that. If you have to run away, that's also fine too. So bye and thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice time.
Katie. Oh, yeah, Katie.
Thank you all.
So, Alison, there's still a question I asked, and you mentioned going to answer the question.
Yes, about market systems and resilience, right?
What was the question, Alison? If you could share.
It's a really good question, and I want us to also come back to it next time. But Jamila asked a question. She was saying, let me see. I want to make sure I get it exactly right. Yes. Could I please explain again the thin line between MSD and resilience, if possible, with this scenario? The thing is, for me, MSD and resilience, they fit quite nicely together. What we're trying to do overall is we're trying to attain an outcome for our target group. So, okay, let's talk poultry in Northeast Nigeria, right? So we're trying to attain increased income, maybe nutritional outcome, in the face of all of the shocks and stresses, conflict and others that are happening in Northeast Nigeria, fuel prices, whatever it may be. MSD provides us the tools to think about how to achieve that more resilient outcome. And so I think what I find useful in terms of that framing is that, like, in the practicalities of it, where some of the tools that our resilience thinking has given us are really useful, it's in making sure that we don't just think about how to make growth happen, but we think about how to make it happen or how to protect that outcome in the face of a shock or a stress. Which means that, like, there at certain stages in our market systems analysis process, there are certain tools from the resilient side that help us bring in that shock and stress lens. So for me, that differential vulnerability grid, where you've got the exposure and the sensitivity to a shock and a stress, it can be really valuable looking at our target group to better understand the differences within the target group. So, not just women, but digging in more deeply than that, right? But also looking at how those shocks and stresses affect market actors. So for me, that's one tool that I find is really helpful for like layering on that resilience lens. That's one thing that I think is really important when it comes to resilience. There's also what we'll talk about in the next section, which so many of you are dealing with in Nigeria now, which is thinking about how to make the market system more resilient. So we're not just thinking about growing a market system, but making it more resilient in the process. So when we're talking about constraints and incentives and capacities, we're also talking about understanding those better and understanding them as that like slide Katie was showing, in the face of shocks and stresses, as well as when there's fewer shocks and stresses around. So it's just like this like lens to layer on. But the thing that's really great about MSD is it gives us then the tools to think about how to affect these things. So a lot of Mercy Corps' resilience framing is helping us think about the context and how shocks and stresses affect things. But then what we really need is the nuts and bolts of like, what do we do about that? Well, we think about market facilitation. And we think about how we can work with a set of actors in our environment. And that's where like a lot of our MSD tools are really valuable. So that's like that's like my way of thinking about it. To me, they fit together quite well.
Can I throw in an example?
Katie. Yeah, jump in.
Which obviously won't use the Mercy Corps resilience jargon frameworks, blah, blah, blah. But this is actually bringing an example from WASH, so bringing my other perspectives. So when I started really getting interested in market systems resilience was when I was working with Oxfam and looking at how to bring in market systems approaches to the way they did humanitarian interventions. And I was extremely frustrated to see how continuous humanitarian interventions had completely undermined the resilience of the local market systems where we were working. So in the example, I'll send you the reports, or you can put it out in the email or whatnot if you want. So it's all public knowledge. Basically, in Zimbabwe, every year you get typhoid or cholera outbreaks in Harare, because the WASH system essentially doesn't prevent it from happening. It happens on a seasonal basis when there's changes in weather patterns, okay? And it shouldn't be happening. Zimbabwe generally has a very good WASH system. It's just declined over time, but the facilities are there, and that shock, that outbreak, it's a man-made one. There's something that we can do to prevent it. Now, every year, when those outbreaks happen, two standard things happen. There are free distributions of water treatment soap and various other campaigns that go on to change your hygiene behaviour. And then NGOs go around and fix all the boreholes that have not been fixed for a year to make sure that the water isn't being contaminated, which is what the vast majority of what we would say the target group have been consuming in the areas, okay, that are affected by the outbreaks. And when we started to really look into the market system and how we could actually use the market system better to respond to the crisis, it became really evident that there was zero incentive for the communities to actually maintain the boreholes because every year somebody else fixed it. So they always waited until it was contaminated, thus starting the outbreak, because there were no financial mechanisms or incentives to actually continue that maintenance. And those boreholes had actually been built because outside of the centralized WASH system that existed, that was owned by local utilities and government that maintain that, because of the economic crisis in Harare a number of years before. So they've been built by NGOs, but the whole mechanism for how they'd actually be supported and maintained was not really properly thought through. And now it's created a dependency on the NGOs to look after them, and they're separate to what the market system already had to provide water to those communities. There wasn't any agreement then made with the utility companies or the government on if they wanted to take ownership of those boreholes or whether they should have been closed up, because they're now perpetuating potential outbreaks if they're not maintained. That was the first thing. The second thing was the behavior of people to prevent outbreaks hasn't been encouraged either. So what happens is when an outbreak happens, you get a free distribution of water treatment and soap. So what you tend to see is that people aren't buying water treatment products prior to the outbreak occurring. They have to be using water treatment products at all times in the year to stop an outbreak happening, but they only ever use that behavior when an outbreak has actually occurred, which will mean that they will never stop an outbreak from occurring. And in Harare, they actually manufacture this water treatment, but the manufacturer doesn't ever sell it locally because the distribution and the purchases come from the humanitarian agencies and they completely undermine the local supply chains. So if you actually went and talked to the local kiosks and everyone, no one ever supplies it, the answer was because the NGOs give it out for free. So we actually started to embark on, though humanitarian funding is different to development one, so it was kind of difficult to do a long-term behaviour change programme over trying to encourage people to keep buying water treatment throughout the year and building up the strength of those supply chains again by trying to get the humanitarian actors to stop distributing it for free, maybe subsidising it, but making sure it was coming through the supply chains to stop bringing in that behaviour. Because essentially what they'd done was created a non-resilient system by doing the interventions they were doing. So I started to really think about market systems resilience because I could see what was already happening about undermining that resilience when all the jigsaw puzzles of the pieces are there, all the potential, the capacity is there to do it. It's just not being incentivized in the right way. Hope that's a good example for everyone.
Yeah, it is. It actually brings me back to a scenario again where I actually need more advice on this. There is a certain location where we do intervention for the PDR. So and in that same location there is also other organization and as well Mercy Corps in that organization in that location, sorry. So what we are giving or what we are supplying to the participants where we use market system, other organizations also give the same input or the same checks to the participants in those locations, like a direct kind of approach, so which is coinciding with what we are doing for market system, and as well having this kickback from the community on issue of this is given us for free and while you are taking the market system approach. So the kickback was a little bit much at some point. However, the chicks they are purchasing from us or from the mother unit got finished in the mother unit. They actually purchased how, but that kickback kept coming back to us as the team for doing the same thing, and as well others are giving it for free, and then us we are asking them to buy. At some point, it's kind of created this long time dependency. So I'm just looking at how can you like kind of pitch to the community now in terms of transiting from humanitarian or direct approach to an MSD approach, or looking at every intervention now with the lens of MSD, most especially even within the same organization.
Oh, Jamila, that's such a good question. And I think it's everybody's struggling with this as we transition through. I've got some thoughts, and then Alison, I think you've probably got some thoughts as well, but I actually think it's one of those, I don't know if it currently exists in the mentorship model, modules, but I think it should be a topic in itself, this topic, particularly for working in fragile contexts. From a pitch perspective, it's really understanding again why people might choose to do something differently. In certain contexts, people are fed up of getting aid and they want to move away from that product, that way it works. So you might be able to start talking about why we're doing this in this different way. It's to enable you to get out of that dependency. In the circumstance where I was, where people are getting free goods and they're quite happy with that, we actually saw that it took collaboration with every other NGO that worked in that area to stop. That consistency was needed, and the same messaging as to why it was changing, and really being very specific up front about what was the benefit for the target group who suddenly weren't getting anything for free. How can you articulate it in a way that shows maybe a non-financial benefit that outweighs the financial benefit of getting it for free? And it might be not just personal gain in terms of well-being, but in the local community, businesses grew because suddenly their supply chains were stronger and things. And it's getting it down to the language and understanding the cultural norms and the social norms in those areas to articulate in a way that isn't using the jargon that I'm using right now. Making it very specific to those communities, and bringing on board some of the community leaders or anybody that has influence to see if they can understand the benefits of what you're trying to do differently. I mean, I did have, when I've been working on these projects before, I have actually noticed how it's very easy to bring government and market actors on side. It tends to be the target group, if they have had direct interventions, to be the harder one to swing. I know that the Biddy team they said that actually, even though they've been given out free energy goods and services before, people were very happy to move towards paying for services. And I think that this was the pitch. The distributions before were low quality and unreliable, so they fell apart. So the pitch was actually, we're going to provide you better quality services, and yes, you'll have to pay for something, but it'll be better quality, it'll be better for you and your household. Over the time, you're going to make money and save more because it is better. But if it's just free industry, you won't ever get that kind of quality. So we're trying to find a way to make it better for you. And that's how they did it in Uganda for the Star Energy program. Alison, I'll be quiet now. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I was gonna say something like similar. It's like consistency, reliability, quality, I think often become big factors. And I'm reminded of like sitting, actually, this was a BD meeting in the Uganda refugee setting, and government and NGO actors literally like screaming at each other in a room. And these are East Africans. It's less common. just about whether or not refugees can pay for seeds. So it's something that we're going to talk about a little bit in more detail, which is like understanding, like having a more granular understanding of the customer segmentation and what willingness to pay is. Like, yes, some refugees have just arrived, and that's a completely different segment than those who are saying like, I'm trying to get on with my life. I'm trying to like start a farm. I've been here for 6 months or a year. So I think it makes sense to also recognize that like who's the business case for, which segments does it make sense for and which one doesn't. It's like we're not trying to advocate like against social safety nets and all of these other things. It's much more about creating that more resilient system where those market actors do exist. Anyways, I know go ahead.
Particularly on the refugee point as well, considering there's the protection element. And if you're working in settlements, camps, UNHCR are really pushing on that. It's bringing UNHCR on board first to get access to the right target groups and making sure that they are confident that you're thinking about those inclusivity and protection challenges in what you're providing. And there might be parts of the target group. This is why target group profiling is so important, that that we can reach this amount of people, but this little group we're not going to be able to reach. So they might need more help. But by doing that profiling, you start to work out who you can target with the right things. But UNHCR are at a big big, they have a lot of pushback from the protection and inclusivity point of view. That said, they are at the KHQ level really pushing market systems development approaches for refugees. So there's the technical leads at the global get the need to do this. It's more at the field level that you're getting a lot of the pushback.
So I was just gonna add one thing, potential that we I don't know, we might look at it along the way is really like the incentive of other actors looking at the political economy, because sometimes like even in the context of Uganda, like you'd find that people want the direct approach or delivery approach to really go through, because they sort of have like kickbacks and all that kind of structure, even just like power control with that kind of incentive. So when you're looking at you're mapping your actors, you really need to look like broadly, like who are really benefiting even from just the way it's structured, you know, and what is sort of the incentive or disincentive for them not, you know, to buy in sort of an MSD approach or in a way that is not direct, working with different actors and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like power play as well that, you know, we need to like sort of pay attention to those actors and their functions.
Great point. Great point. Okay. Has anybody else got any questions, or shall we round up?
Happy Friday.
Okay. Great questions, though.
Happy Friday. Like I'm having like massive company here, like everyone. Like,
hi.
Everybody.
No,
Put it on the video.
Yeah. Good.
All right, guys. Thank you. Have a good
Bye,
Friday.
Daniel, and the kids.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
And row!